Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, it's about recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. How you feeling today, bud?
Now I'm feeling great. It's been a harried, busy morning, but I think we got everything, taken care of. I'm here. I'm present, focused, excited.
So how does a therapist navigate this crazy life? You know what I mean? Because I think most people think of a therapist, they've got the rule book on who people are and how to react and stuff. But you have good days and you have bad days.
Sure.
And so do you do something that, besides meditation, that gets you through some troubling times or kind of hard things?
Good question. I like to listen to things that make me laugh. So in between things I'm doing throughout the day, if I'm driving somewhere, I'll usually listen to stand-up comedy or something like that, because that just sort of lightens my mood and helps me bring myself back to what's really important. Because otherwise, everybody, no matter what your job is, you can kind of get spun out on the details of what you're doing, and it can feel like the most important thing in the world, and then you can get all in your head about stuff. So I like to laugh. That I would say that's something I do quite a bit.
On an average, as a therapist, how many patients do you see in a day?
In a day,
I'm sure it varies, but like an average.
So I see too many. So if there's another psychologist or social worker out there listening, they're going to be like, that's not true. But in a week, I usually see 40 to 45 hours worth of patients.
And when you think about that, I mean, most people, when they go to a therapist, they're working through issues, they're working through problems. It's usually pretty heavy conversation and probably somewhat, laboring. You know what I mean? I mean, for
Sure.
you.
Well, yeah, it's every person that comes in. I mean, nobody makes an appointment and spends the money to come in and tell you things are super awesome. How are you doing, Matt? Like, that's not our role, right? So people are dealing with heavy stuff. Yeah.
So what I'm getting to is that you probably wouldn't, but the general public might be surprised how many first responders and people out there that listen to this show that want somebody to talk to, because their every day is seeing people on their worst day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we're talking about EMTs, 911, police officers, firemen, and nurses. I mean, emergency room people. I mean, their every day is seeing most people on their worst day.
Yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Actually, that's a great segue into May. Happens to be Mental Health Month, Mental Health Awareness Month, and we often don't think about the caregivers and the mental health issues that they have. And so there are some therapists who specialize in seeing first responders and other, therapists and psychologists and people that are out on the front lines, because we need support as well. So yeah, that happens a lot. And anytime you have the opportunity to show a little appreciation to a first responder, I would say you ought to take it, because people are out on the front lines trying to help others. And the last couple of years have just been kind of socially stressful. They've been strange, and not that our country hasn't gone through stressful social periods before. If you think about 9/11, and if you think about Vietnam and Korea, World War II, like some of these global crises that have happened. But this last 2 years has been a little bit different, because while some of those big crises have united people, the last couple of years have been somewhat dividing with how people feel about COVID. We just learned today that Governor Cox has COVID. So regardless of one's political opinions, COVID is still a real thing. And the reality is it's unfortunately become a politicized issue when it really should have just stayed a healthcare issue. And we have a lot of folks out there kind of divided. So I think there's a lot of unprecedented stress, and first responders are needed now more than ever.
We live in a very divisive time.
Yeah.
And things are going crazy. And I remember 2 years ago when we were right in the thick of COVID, and I know COVID's still a thing, and I know that, but right when it was coming out and nobody knew what to do. And a lot of people were staying at home. There was a lot of isolation. And I remember you sitting in that exact chair right there going, the next epidemic is going to be
mental health.
Mental health.
Yeah.
And here we are in May, it's mental health awareness. And I don't think we've done enough, just to be honest with you. I mean, I think we're trying and everybody's doing what they can, but it's one of those things that people don't understand. Mental health is such a large umbrella, and most people don't know what falls underneath that, or how to handle it, or how to deal with it, where to find help, what kind of resources are available.
Even when to say I need some help, like life in general is stressful and challenging, and most of us like to be tough, say, I'll use my skills, I'll press through, and that's all good and healthy. But at some point, sometimes you have to realize I could reach out and use a little bit of help and guidance. And that's usually when I would say, if you've had more than a string of 3 or 4 days in a row where you haven't felt like yourself, if you're starting to have thoughts that are like kind of hopeless and pessimistic, here's a fancy word, anhedonia. If you start to feel like things that used to be enjoyable are no longer enjoyable, like Casey, for you, if you went out to golf one day and it was a great golf day, but you left feeling like I didn't really enjoy myself, those sorts of red flags are an indication that you maybe are getting worn down. A lot of people are worn down. I've had 2 conversations already today with people that employ other people about the difficulty getting people to work. And so there's just this strange social experiment, I guess, going on right now. And I do think that our mental health is taking a little bit of a hit. In fact, one article I read just last night before I went to bed was talking about research over the last 10 years and correlating the rise of social media and digital devices like the iPhone in the hands of teenagers and their poor sleep and their decline in mental health. Isn't that interesting? Here we are right now with more access, right in the palm of your hand than ever before to talk to a crisis counselor, to get input and help on anything you need. Yet our teenagers are having some of the worst mental health issues across the board than they've ever had before. And one of the reasons is likely poor sleep due to being on their devices really late at night. And so when we look at research, sometimes we can intervene in a positive way. So I would say one mental health thing you could do for your kids this month, anybody out there who has kids, and by the way, this applies to adults too, is learn to turn off devices maybe an hour before bed. I know that's going to cause major conflicts with teenagers all over, but if you can help them understand that what you put into your body affects what you can get out of your body. And so we see that with food. That's easy. It's easy to talk about that with drugs and alcohol and things like that. It's even easy to see that with exercise. But what about sleep? We sacrifice sleep like crazy. And who needs sleep more than somebody whose body is growing at a rapid rate? So your older children who maybe already have a phone. I mean, I know most elementary school kids have a phone at this point.
I'm guilty. My 10-year-old's got one.
Well, there are real benefits to those young kids having it. I can be in touch with my teenager anytime I need to. But on the flip side,
how much is that phone used for phone calls versus watching stuff on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram?
Yep, exactly. And so I would say an hour before bed, learn to turn those off, plug them in somewhere, engage your brain other ways so that you can get good sleep. If you can do it, your teenagers can do it. Right there's a mental health tip for May.
And for me, I would say, during the month of May being mental health awareness, have a little empathy, have a little compassion, have a little more love in your heart and in your conversations, because those really mean the difference to me. They do.
Okay, can I tell you?
Yes.
Oh, right. So I blew it. I blew empathy today. How about that? So the psychologist is going to tell you an example of where I was not empathetic today.
Okay.
And it was on my way over here. So I'm working at my downtown clinic, University of Utah, and not to get into it, but I had this whole thing, this to-do happening where I was very frustrated with a staffing issue, and it was not worked out yet, but I was like, I got to get down to KSL, record our show. I'm heading over there, and I'm missing the streets on purpose that have construction to go down the right streets, and I found the right street, and I'm like, this is great, and I'm coming up to turn left at a green light. There's nobody there, except there's one car in front of me in the turn lane just sitting there. Just sitting there. They don't have a turn signal on. There's nobody in the crosswalk. And I laid on my horn. laid on it like I was from New York or something. And their head popped up, and they looked around, and then they went. Now, I hope it didn't ruin their day, but guess what? I've been feeling bad about that for the last half an hour since it happened, because I realized, you know what, Matt? I don't know what that person was going through. I have no idea, because that was unusual, right?
Right, yeah.
Right, like there's something going on.
Yeah,
it could have been that they were daydreaming. I didn't even think about that. I just went right to the horn, and it was one of those angry. Like, you know,
you could hear it in that horn.
Yeah, you could hear the horn.
It wasn't a doot-doot.
It wasn't like, hey,
like
buddy.
a da-da.
Yeah.
It was a doot-doot.
Yeah.
It was like,
yeah. And then as I was driving the rest of the way, and then I ended up following them for a while, so I was worried. I was worried they were thinking like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to get me, you know. And then eventually they turned off. I don't know if it was out of fear or if we were going different places, but they turned off, and I was thinking, you know what, I blew it. I really did, because I could have given a little beep. I could have waited, and they might have looked up and seen and gone, you know.
could have parked your car and went and knocked on to make sure they were alive.
I could have done something like that. Anything else, really. And I had the very same thought of what you just said, which is you don't know what somebody else is going through. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to patients about that, you know, to help them develop empathy, especially with driving, where a lot of rage happens in our cars. And I got all caught up in my own stuff and probably gave somebody a big start. So anyway, I agree with you, Casey, and that's good. It's good for all of us.
There's an old punk band, and it's called the Me First and the Gimme Gimmes.
Oh, love them.
And that's what I feel like society is right now.
Yep.
There's a bunch of me first and the gimme gimme. It's all about me and what can I get.
Yep.
And I can tell you right now, with my recovery, the blessings I've been given have been absolutely amazing. And I do know a lot of it's because of what I am doing and giving myself freely. So does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so I think the more you can give, the better it is. Always, always. I remember when people was like, the real gift is me giving you a gift. And I was like, that is stupid because I'm getting an Xbox. But then you realize
right.
how
it's
cool
true.
it really is.
When you're on that side, when you change perspective. In fact, occasionally I'll have somebody say, are you still doing that podcast? Like, it's been 3 years now. And I think you and I didn't really expect it to go this long.
No.
And I said, yeah, I do. And they're like, well, do you still like doing it? And I said, well, yeah. And they'll say, well, what do you like about it? And actually, that's one of my very favorite things about this show is being able to talk to people who are in recovery and see how they're giving back to our communities. I had no idea before we started this show how active people are in giving back and what a difference it makes in our communities, people who are in recovery from some sort of addiction. So I would absolutely agree, because when they start talking about that, their faces light up. And I think that's where you and I, have even gotten emotional at times.
We get a front row seat to see amazing people do amazing things with their life. And that's going to lead us to our guest today. His name is Travis Richey. We're going to find out about his story in just a second. You're listening to Project Recovery. Hey, welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. He's a clinical psychologist. Our guest today is Travis Richey. We got him from a previous guest. Her name was Portia. Portia Lauder.
Great name.
Yeah, she was great.
And a great guest.
She was an amazing guest. And you know what? She has done such a wonderful thing for this podcast, because we have gotten so many new listeners because of her.
Yeah.
And now we're getting this wonderful guest. And to be honest with you, Travis, I don't know a lot about your story. I just know that you were friends with Portia, and that was good enough for me. So before we get any further, what were you addicted to?
Nothing.
Then, like nothing?
Boom. Never once. To this very day, never tasted alcohol, never tried drugs, never smoked a cigarette.
So then why are you here?
Because I teach people how to overcome adversity.
Okay, but you've got to have some sort of trauma or something in your life to get you to this point.
A lot of trauma growing up. Yeah, I grew up in a broken household, as we call it in today's world. My father is a notorious organized crime figure and was addicted to heroin. And so all of my younger years growing up, it was the cycle of dad trying to get clean, mom trying to help him get clean, society, the community understanding who he was, and because of who he was, not having a conversation about his addictions, and they were to go by the wayside. And then us children, me and my sisters, really suffering based on his poor decisions.
Was that then? If I understand what you're saying, that was public knowledge that your father was an organized crime figure. And therefore, nobody really wanted to maybe push the issue with him about his addictions?
Yeah, Pops was a menacing figure. You know, a bodybuilder, you know, stood about 6'2", 260 pounds. And, you know, based on his physical stature as well as some of his connections in the community and otherwise, it just made for a conversation that most people didn't want to address.
Can we ask what community you grew up in, where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up back east. I grew up in a little town called Framingham, basically the outskirts of Boston.
Okay.
Yeah. And so what was that like growing up in that? Because, I mean, we've had many people who have sat...
Were you aware as a kid that your dad was associated with organized crime?
I was aware of that. I was aware of the drugs. I was aware of all of it. Yeah.
So you had a front row seat to this.
Front row seat.
You know, and we've had people sit in that chair who grew up in not exact situation, but similar situations. That's when they first decided to try drugs, to try alcohol, to try that. Because if dad was doing it and mom was doing it and everybody around us was doing it, it seemed like the thing to do. But you didn't do it.
I went the opposite direction. Yeah, I had a front row seat, as you say, for a blueprint of what not to become.
That's interesting, though. I think Casey's point is that at a young age, when we're immature, we tend to romanticize certain tough guy lifestyles, right? You know, watching the movies and TV shows,
like
and
popping in my head is Sons of Anarchy and Sopranos. I mean, you know, that's what I'm thinking,
right? But without wisdom, which comes with age and experience, most people would fall into that, thinking that's cool, that's powerful, especially young boys. Young boys want to feel like powerful, you know?
Yeah.
So why do you think you saw it as a blueprint of what not to do? Because that's a tremendously mature statement, I think, even for an adult, but let alone a kid.
Yeah, I can tell you, looking back, you know, I had myself with my mom and all my sisters, my siblings. You know, it was just a role that I had taken on at a very early age. Financially, personally, you know, from a protective perspective. You know, for me, it was something I just knew without a doubt. I didn't want to be out of control. And I think, to answer your question specifically, where it comes to is, you know, most of our nights were so tumultuous. You know, there was so much anxiety in the air, and I never wanted to be in a situation I didn't have control.
Makes sense. Yeah.
There was many nights where, you know, you talk about mental health prior to this, many nights where, you know, my sisters and I would be asleep in the basement or pretending to be asleep in the trundle beds, and dad would be high as a kite on heroin with a loaded .357 revolver just standing in the doorway.
Oh, my goodness.
And so those nights, really, if I were to look back now as an adult, those were the nights that forced me to say, if I am needed in a situation, then I need all of my faculties about me.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting that you say you didn't like being out of control. And, you know, my father says the same thing, who quit drinking when I quit drinking.
Yep.
But he never really got stupid drunk like I did because he never liked to be out of control. He goes, I didn't like that feeling. But me, I loved it. I welcomed it. I wanted it. You know what I mean? I actually thrived in that out of control scenario. And that's what I thought that I did, but and I seemed to do pretty good in it. But now 3 years sober, I like to be in control. I do like that feeling. And I think maybe if you want to go back to my younger years, I didn't think I knew I could control those things. I didn't know that was a power or a skill. I thought that I could obtain, that I could actually utilize.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does, and it's both of what you're both saying is actually a very interesting commentary on our early life experiences, right? So Travis, you grew up in a home that had unpredictability. Yeah. You weren't sure what was going to happen. It could happen at any moment. It could be a small thing. Often it was scary, chaotic, and made you feel out of control. And somehow you put two and two together that, you know, drugs, alcohol, and this lifestyle were contributing to that. Whereas Casey, even though your parents were divorced, they're both, you know, upstanding, good folks who worked hard and created a stable, kind of calm home life for you. And therefore feeling out of control probably never felt too scary to you because you were always able to come home to a place of control.
And when we did go out of control, because my mom and dad were known to have big parties and fun parties, it was the fun kind of out of control.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was like, hey, I can't believe.
But that's even still grounded. That's not scary. That's not fearful, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like if there was a big raucous party going on and maybe something, you know, got broken or whatever, but but it was in the name of fun.
Yeah.
And you knew you were safe.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, Travis, you grew up without that constant sense of safety, which
Correct.
for so many children and so many adults who struggle with mental health issues in their adult life, a lot of it can be traced back to feeling unsafe and the unpredictability of safety in their childhood.
Yeah.
So, Travis, you said you took on the role as protector of your siblings and even your mom, I'm guessing.
Correct.
And you always wanted to have all your faculties just in case you need them.
Correct.
And how did that work throughout your high school year? I mean, were you a good student?
First of all, what's your place in the? How many siblings do you have, and what's your order?
3 sisters, 1 older and then 2 younger than I. Yeah.
And in high school, good student?
Good student. For me, numbers and finance and business were always interesting. And so I was the kid that was, had the lemonade stand on the corner, at the age of 8, and always looking for kind of a small business or a side hustle. And so, yeah, I enjoyed learning, still do enjoy learning. Decent student, from a perspective of, high school.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was kind of the high school years for me were when things kind of got mellowed out. After about 20 years of mom and dad being together, mom finally had enough and got the courage to go and set out on her own, got her own degree, and that's when they really kind of split. So those were our high school years.
And off air, you were telling me that recently your father passed away.
Yeah.
And so you feel a little more free to talk about some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Fast forward, you graduate high school. Is college in your future, or? Yeah,
college is in the future. Yep. I wanted to do finance. It's really where I come from. I'm a numbers kid. So growing up, kind of to rewind, my dad with what he did, it was business, but on the wrong end of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. And so it was constantly, whenever you're with him, it was constant learning. He always had a kind of a funny one-liners. And, at the age of 8, they didn't really make any sense. But now, fast forward and you go, there was some wisdom there. And, maybe it was just packaged incorrectly.
He's doing business. It's just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the amazing thing. And you're going to be able to elaborate on this a little later in the podcast. But we have met some of the smartest, most creative, most hardworking
criminals.
Yes.
Yeah.
That you go, look, if you could just harness this and put this in and like you said, do packaging, you would be unstoppable.
Yeah. Yeah, undoubtedly. And I've met those guys over the years and, had the opportunity to hang out with them. But yeah, to your point of like the SOA, the Sons of Anarchy and, the Sopranos, I mean, that was really, like kind of my upbringing. You go even back further than that, like the HBO show of Oz.
Yeah.
Many of those guys who, were also, around with my pops and, we grew up at age of 16, driving.
So I'm guessing that if your father hadn't passed away yet, you might be a little hesitant to talk openly about this. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. He passed away last year, and so our mission with what we're doing, in the world and giving back has become too big to kind of hide under a rock any longer. And most people want to connect the dots. For me, as we'll get to, but for me, the real impetus of what I do is time with my kids, and so that goes back to as a dad, I don't have one. I don't have a role model. And so I think I can figure anything out if I have enough time. Mm-hmm. And so that's always kind of been my North Star, my guiding light.
But it sounds like your dad did take you around with him and spend time with him.
Oh, we got taken around quite a bit.
So what
Yeah.
tell us about that. I mean,
yeah, it was kind of the best of both worlds. It was 1 foot in and 1 foot out. You'd come home from church on Sundays. My mom's a convert to the LDS church because of my father, ironically.
Well, how does that work?
Yeah, I know. Interesting, right? So my mom grew up Catholic in Chicago, and my dad's family goes back many, many, many years to pioneer generations in the LDS church.
Okay.
And so mom and dad meet, and mom converts to Mormonism.
Okay, so your dad was the Mormon in the relationship in the beginning. Interesting.
Yeah, it kind of had all the right things, if you will.
Did he remain an active member?
No, definitely not. It was, there was Sundays where he would attend with us. Mm-hmm. But, for him, we would grow up and it was just very, I'll give you an example. He'd come home from church and he would have the house clean and he would have dinner ready. And then that was Sunday and everything was kind of okay. You'd watch the Pats game and, life was pretty good. On Monday, if we were driving to school, if he was taking us to school and somebody cut us off, more than likely he would get out of his vehicle and pull them through their window on the turnpike and beat them.
And you witnessed that as a kid?
Dozens of times.
Wow.
Dozens of times, yeah. Disrespect was just one thing that we didn't, deal with, or we didn't accommodate.
Didn't tolerate it.
Didn't tolerate it at all. So, Pop Warner games,
So I didn't do too bad today with the honk.
Like
comparatively speaking, that's what you're saying. Like the honk.
When Casey said to stop and check on them, I immediately had this in my head, like, nah, that's not what would have happened. No, we would have removed them and set them on the side, then taken their vehicle, most likely given it to a chop shop. And anyhow, that's a whole different.
Really? So this is your childhood.
This was my childhood, and so what I say, 1 foot in and 1 foot out. My mom is a saint. My mom is really trying to keep us together. My mom is really trying to fight the addictions, like any wife would.
Yeah.
And at the same time, life is kind of pretty good. We've got 4 kids. We're healthy. The money's right, whether it's, black or white is neither here nor there. But, right, kind of the things that a lot of women, I think, who may be listening to this don't want to talk about in society.
Yeah.
And to this very day, right? So many people, this better than I, we stay in relationships we shouldn't for different reasons.
Right.
Most of the time, it's children. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, it's finances. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, oh, sure.
Right. And so whether this is 1984 or 2022, the
dynamics are there. And a lot of it has to do with our survival and taking care of our children. And we do make a lot of decisions that ultimately can be self-harming. Correct.
Yeah. But yeah, so he took us around. And so, Mom would try to recorrect those paths.
Do you feel like he was, it doesn't sound like he was trying to shield you from
No, when you're picking
world.
up heroin and methamphetamines,
that was I was going to ask,
millions of dollars and ammo. No, there's no shielding there.
Yeah.
There was a list of, we're going to go in this house, and if we don't come out next amount of time, here's who to call and here's where to go.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was very cerebral. And so back to the question of why I never, partook, it was a lot of those things. At 16, I was the guy that was reliable. I was the guy that they could count on. I was always there. If it was midnight, I wasn't high. I wasn't doing anything inappropriate. I was always reliable.
Yeah, which, regardless of maybe some of the other dynamics that caused fear or insecurity with that sort of upbringing, there's a really primitive and powerful one, and that is little boys want to have the approval of their fathers.
Correct.
And so if that quickly became something you were known for, being reliable, then that would have outweighed most likely the desire to try drugs and alcohol, because you're getting approval probably, I'm assuming, from your dad, like your dad could rely on you.
You're 100%. I've never thought about that till you just laid that out. But
he does that all the time.
You're totally. He's
a doctor.
Day one is a doctor.
Well, it's a good story. You're telling a great story.
but basically, he was parentified as well.
Yeah. You're treated like an adult, and you're given responsibilities in your dad's world that were probably a little scary for you. But because you became, your reputation was a positive one. He's the kid we can rely on. That probably made you feel pretty good, at least in those times you're interacting with your dad.
Correct. Yeah. You're exactly spot on.
Do you feel like your dad was sort of grooming you for that lifestyle, Al? Like, did he think that
definitely.
you would take over at some
definitely.
point?
That was definitely something that he enjoyed. And, as we got older, those conversations started to happen, and was never my desire.
You're listening to Travis Richey here on Project Recovery. We're going to find out more about his fascinating story in just a few seconds. You're listening to Project Recovery right here on KSL. Welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. Our guest today is Travis Richey, who's never been addicted to anything. He's been going into great detail about his upbringing. His father was crime boss?
Organized crime boss. I think this is the first time we've said that on the show.
Yeah.
There you go.
And because of what you saw in him, you made it a mission not to do that to yourself. As you said, it was a blueprint of what not to do.
Correct, yeah.
And so you were talking about your early childhood. You've probably at this point graduated high school, and you've got to make a decision. Do I go in the family business, or do I go the other way? You went another way.
I went the other way. Yeah, I went the other way. Went and got some education, then went on a mission for the church.
But how was that conversation with your dad? Because you before our break, you kind of laid out the fact that from a very young age, your dad was taking you for ride-alongs, and you were witness to his crime-based behaviors, and eventually, even by the age of 16, before you graduated from high school, you were kind of the guy sitting in the car who could be reliable, and you had instructions of what to do if they didn't come back, and you were witness to everything that was happening. So you said, well, maybe he was kind of grooming me to kind of step into a role once I was a little bit older. But how did you break that news to your dad that you didn't want to do that? That, to me, it seems like that might have been a hard conversation.
Definitely a hard conversation, and that was kind of where we parted ways. It was definitely where we, when I chose to go and get an education and go on a mission and really set myself aflame on a different path, that was really where him and I parted ways.
Yeah, and how did he react to?
Like any father would, who feels that you're kind of diminishing their importance in their life. He's super upset about it. And held a lot of that grudge, even up until last year. So
you go to set the new path of flame, as you said. You went to a little bit of college, then went on a mission.
Where'd you go off to college?
University of Miami.
Okay. Now, University of Miami's in Ohio, right? Or
Florida.
Or it's which one is it? Miami University's in
Correct,
Ohio.
in Ohio.
University of Miami's in Florida.
Hey, I got you.
Did you know that?
Yeah, I did. That's the home of the Sigma Chi's, bro.
All right.
I got you. So you go to Florida, which is a notorious party school.
Yes. It was a lot of fun. I was there in the heyday.
But you didn't party.
No, for me, it's always been, I really knew from a young age I was focused on business. And I really wanted to do something different.
Were you there when The Rock was playing football for them?
No.
Okay.
No, that was earlier.
So then you go on a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints. Where do you go?
To Washington, Spokane.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you find that experience?
Loved it. I went on a mission, and I apologize for everybody who's going to be offended, but I went on a mission when missions were great. I do. I have all the elders at our home, on a constant basis now with my wife and I, and I couldn't do a mission in today's world. My mission was 100% service-based. It was in the middle of nowhere. At the time, our mission went from Spokane all the way over to Missoula, like 300 miles in Canada, down to the Tri-Cities. I mean, it was huge. It was beautiful. And most of what we did was, find complete strangers and figure out how to serve them. And that, to me, is what.
And what a wonderful experience that can be for young people. I would say whether it's through a mission or any religious organization, or whether it's
humanitarian,
a humanitarian thing.
Service is incredible.
And it's such a growing experience to get out of yourself when you're a young adult and do that. So I can tell that meant a lot to you, and I would encourage people to consider that still today if they can find a way to do it.
Oh man, to get outside yourself for those times and to learn the things. I think, you talked about this briefly with your mental health and the adversity. I make the comment often as a joke. The door knocking. A lot of LDS guys will come back from the missions. They'll start door knocking. I think we should send kids out prior to the mission and door knock, because there's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of adversity, right? To get up every day and be told no 99 times, to seek the last 100. Right? To deal with other people, to live with other men who are never going to be clean. You've got 8 different opinions, right? Like, there's a lot to be said for that. How do I cook, and how do I shop, and how do I just live about myself and garner myself, right? How do I actually take care of myself mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally while I'm alone?
Yeah.
Right?
And dealing with adversity.
So I loved it. It was a beautiful time for me, and so I appreciated it.
And you came home. Did you go back to school?
Came home, finished up school. Yep, and met a beautiful little lady. And my sister actually was set to go on a mission, New York South. And so I was visiting, and my wife, my current wife, she was visiting her sisters, and life kind of all happened at the same time. And we met after church one day. It was my first time and last time at the singles ward.
That's how you do a singles ward, right there. You just go once.
That's it.
Get hitched. You're done.
That's it. 15 years later, life is pretty good. So,
but yeah. So let me ask you this: in all your upbringing with your father and your mother and your sisters, did your dad ever do any jail time?
In and out. In and out. Yeah. Based on, who he was, especially in the latter time, it was more of a negotiating process.
Mm-hmm.
He got a rap sheet for vehicular manslaughter, and, then it turned into a chess game. Who are we going to put away, and why, and how, and who's more important and who's less important? And so it gave me almost zero faith in the justice system. Anytime that you'd visit his house, there was people there, and they were just negotiating who was up next.
And that faith gets tested because you find yourself in your own situation.
Yeah, Pops didn't help me from a justice-impacted perspective when the state of Arizona came after me.
So how does the state of Arizona come after you?
I'm a young man. I'm 25 years old, and I've raised millions of dollars and running a successful hedge fund. And we had a fund that was opened quarter 4 of 06, closed in quarter 3 of 07, and raised about $3 million in that fund. And that $3 million came from the state of Arizona and investors in the state of Arizona. And they had a rule there that says anything over the threshold of $99,000 must be registered with their corporation commission. Kind of a wild, wild west rule. If you equate it in today's world, securities laws for anybody who's listening are just as clear as mud. But today's world, you can purchase legal marijuana in Oregon, but you can't bring it to Idaho, right? And even though a state may recognize it as legal like Colorado does, the federal government, if you have a U-Haul full of marijuana, will happily lock you up for the rest of your life.
Because you're on a federal highway, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
So it becomes very confusing, right? And so that's how I equate securities laws to people who haven't spent 8 years at Harvard.
But at the young age of 25, you're killing it.
Had the tiger by the tail, brother.
Yeah.
Had the tiger by the tail. It was a beautiful thing. Everything that I had kind of worked up to, all of the insecurities of childhood, if you will, all of, after mom and dad separated and the financial constraints, living inside of our van, living at members' homes, asking for, the Deseret Bishop storehouse orders, all of that stuff leading up, when you're seeing your mom go through this as she's climbing out away from, where Pops had led her. Now you've made it. I looked down at my Wells Fargo statement. I was 25, made $1 million in a month, but I was numb. I wanted more. I wanted bigger. I wanted better. It was a psychotic state of living.
Would you say it's an addiction?
1,000%.
Addicted to money.
Addicted to the rush. So for me, I tell people money is, and for me, money is never what money is. I can't sleep under it. It's not going to keep me warm, right? But whatever it means to you is the reason that you go after it. And so that money was that very, very, very deep insecurity for me. I knew if I had stacked so much of it away, that life would be okay for my kids. And if I had stacked so much of it away, then I could spend the time to figure this out, right? And as those zeros get bigger and those commas become more, that number that you're supposed to stack away becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you start to do things as a lifestyle that impede getting to that point. And so, yeah, it was definitely an addiction. I thought today I would have probably been one of the most lonely billionaires, on the planet. Truth be told, that was my trajectory. That's where I was headed. And I spoke about it openly. I manifested it. I was running around with people where, $100 million, it wasn't a big thing. $10 million was normal. And, you think when you're 25 and you've raised millions of dollars in 6 months, that's a noteworthy cause. For me, it was just work. It just was what it was. And so it was insatiable, right? And I was feeding that beast constantly. And so there came a point where I think that God had a bigger plan. He intervened quite harshly, and, Life 2.0 emerged. And
the intervention came in the form of 18 months in prison.
17,520 hours in a concrete box.
Wow. And that's because they felt you had violated that securities law.
That's correct. Okay. Yeah. How it works out, and it's true. I have this talk now. I get a lot of phone calls now. People say, how do I unring this bell? And the answer is you don't. When you're talking about securities laws, and it's probably similar to some of the stuff that you do. It's very black and white. In the world that you're in on a daily basis. If you had a wire transfer from A to B, mm-hmm. the answer is yes. Right? The intent doesn't matter. The ideology.
It happened, right?
The answer is yes. And so when you look back and you say, was this $3,059,000 registered with Arizona? No. It was registered with the federal government. Well, Arizona doesn't need to recognize the federal government in this particular case. And since it was over a $99,000 threshold, you had 66 of them.
So you get
Game time.
So all of those, they can prosecute
Every
you on
one of
all
them. My first plea deal was 66 years.
Holy cow.
That was your first plea deal.
First plea deal. I almost passed out.
Now, let me ask you this. I know enough, which is only a little bit, about people in the crime world that their children sort of get on lists. Now, do you think that ever factored into the fact that they're like, oh, he's so-and-so's son?
I don't have to think. I know.
Yeah.
It was said, and it's in my court minutes. You can read
So
it.
they acknowledge that openly.
Yeah, the judge actually used my pedigree against me.
Yeah, that's what I
in
mean.
open court. Yeah, he did that in open
That's
court.
pretty brazen.
It's pretty brazen when you can read that aloud in the United States of America.
Because technically, your dad's crimes aren't your crimes.
I mean, according to certain documents that we live by in the United States.
Yeah, there's a big document that says that that's the case.
Yeah.
But I know enough to know that our reputations follow us, and even the reputations of our families. So there are plenty of cases. Sounds like yours is one of them, where kids of well-known crime people sort of get an extra federal focus on their business dealings and what they do, because there's the assumption that they're gonna violate the law like their fathers did.
And there's a much bigger fish that they'll hopefully hook.
Right.
That's kind of where it rolls up to. Okay, this is $3 million. Where's 10 million? Where's 25? Where's 50? And
what's he really into?
Where does this really end?
If we hold on to him, who can we really get? Yeah.
Right. You got to think. So to rewind for folks, I fought this for 6.5 years.
Oh wow.
Right. And so when you're talking about a first time, non-violent, non-dangerous, non-repetitive, right?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. Should have been a little deference given.
A little bit,
that.
right?
Yeah.
Then I'll add this caveat onto it. I sat down with the federal government, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the FBI. The regional office out of Salt Lake, as a matter of fact, both went through my documents, gave me a clean bill of health.
Oh, wow.
Wrote a letter on my behalf.
They did.
True story.
Wow.
So you would think, okay,
that might help, should help.
Should, possibly, right? And then this entire time, 6.5 years, never once taken into custody. Never once.
So you were at home and
never once. Never put on house arrest, never put in transitional home, never once had the bracelets put on, never once taken into custody. And so you start to add these things up, right? And you start to look back and you go, okay, this is a young man with lots of dollars. This is a family organization. There's some history here in this particular state. And the judge's exact words, they ring true to my wife every time I say them. He said, I'm going to make an example out of you.
Yikes.
There it was. And so for me, I wanted his words to be correct. And I was going to prove him right. And I was going to be an example. I wasn't going to be, as Casey and I talked about prior to this, that victim mentality. I have a choice. I'm going to take this. I'm going to take this opportunity. I'm going to take this adversity. And I'm going to put it squarely on my shoulders. I'm going to figure out what was next. I think oftentimes when we go through this life, we think that because we do things the right way, I went on a mission, I served this, I did that, I married that, I did this,
I didn't do this. I
shouldn't be in this situation.
You're not drinking, you're not using drugs,
Correct.
you're not
Correct. Look at all the things that my dad was that I'm not.
Yep.
Look at all the things I could have done that I did not. Look at all the things that people said about me that I didn't need to do, right? You do this stuff. I do it. We're all guilty of it. We shouldn't, but we do it. Why is me? So the bigger question is, why not me? That's what really struck me as I sat there in that 6x9 cell during intake, and I said, you know what? I wanted a life of a big fish. I wanted this. I manifested this. So I asked for this. So the bigger question is, why not me? And the bigger question is, if you want a life of greatness, then you've signed up for a whole boatload of adversity.
Well, that's true. You get a lot of attention, and it's the crabs in the bucket mentality, which is way too prevalent in our society, where when somebody seems to be climbing up, there's a bunch of people to pull you down. Right?
We love to set our heroes on pedestals in this society and knock them off.
And then knock them off.
We love it.
Yeah.
But the adversity for me is key. I didn't want to sit there, and I had this time. I got sentenced to 2 years in the Department of Corrections, state of Arizona. Arizona had an 85% rule and then 90 days of good time, so I did 15 months. Malcolm Gladwell has a book, and and he talks about 10,000 hours.
Right?
Right.
I've read it.
I've read it.
Casey's read it.
Casey can't read.
Yeah, I did. No, I did. I read that one.
Where did you get that book, Casey?
Dr. Matt gave me the book.
Okay.
And I read it.
Is that the picture one, or he has the word one?
Pop up.
It's a graphic novel version, but it's nice.
And I've also listened to the 10,000 Hour Song by Macklemore, so I feel like I'm pretty versed on the
There
song.
it
Yeah,
is.
that's
There
enough.
it is.
Yeah.
There it is. I
That's
knew there
enough.
was something there.
And so 10,000 hours.
That was my 10,000 hours. I spent 10,000 hours in a 6x9. That was my 10,000 hours to figure out what was next. What does this mean for me?
So I am just sitting over here feeling very, very impressed with that attitude that you are describing from the get-go of your experience. But you weren't the only person dramatically affected by this. You had, at this point, a wife.
Yep.
And how many kids?
Thank goodness, when I went in, our littlest was about 5 months.
5 months.
And
But
he was the only
but you're
one.
leaving behind a wife and a
Yeah, a little
5-month-old.
Brock.
How did that right there? I mean, I can sort of wrap my mind around if I'm alone.
Correct.
I don't have other dependents. Maybe I can be tough. Maybe but that must have seemed really unfair. You had a wife and a child to take care of, and here they are. They're making an example of you.
It was unfair then, and it's unfair now. You're absolutely right. My biggest concern over the last 15 years has always been how do I protect Melissa not to get drugged through the mud because of Travis?
Yeah.
Right? And we in our society, whether it's through Instagram, whether it's through church meetings, whether it's through, neighbors, we enjoy
Dragging people through.
dragging people through.
Gossip seems to be sort of endemic to the human condition, right?
Mm-hmm. Is that a quote somewhere? Can we get that up?
Probably from Dr. Matt.
Guaranteed.
He's a doctor.
It was just a thought.
No, but you're right. It is. And that was my biggest concern. Is she didn't deserve this type of treatment. She didn't deserve to have to come down the 5 hours each way for visitation. They stuck me at this little border town. I could see the flag of Mexico. 90% of our correctional officers came from Mexico to work over in the U.S. And so we saw each other Saturdays and Sundays in visitation in this little crappy trailer. And so, yeah, even then, that was always my concern is how do people perceive her, right? Friends and family, you realize really quickly who's supportive.
Yep.
Right?
A lot of people faded away, I bet.
Oh, brother. People faded away. Investments faded away. People who said, oh, for sure, we'll make sure your wife gets paid. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of distancing, right?
A lot of distancing.
But what was the opposite experience like? Did some people come into focus as true?
And so did she
friends?
and I. That was kind of the beauty of it. I was talking with Portia last night. I meet with more people now, and Portia agreed to this. More people now are free incarcerated than a lot of my friends out in society.
Tell me what do you mean by that?
I think a lot of people who are incarcerated experience a rock bottom and start to look around and go, what is left? And what can I be grateful for? I don't have the ability to be overwhelmed by social media devices. I don't have people looking at me, judging me on street corners. I'm in the same clothes with the same hairdo, with the same bed, with this, right?
Yeah.
And so now I can really focus on what brings me fulfillment. And those people that are incarcerated oftentimes receive fulfillment at that rock bottom. Whereas we in society, myself included, on my upward trajectory, there was always something more. There was always another party, another event, another
car.
reason. Exactly.
Another $1 million to make.
Precisely. Yeah. I would take it. It was a sickness. I mean, I had a fleet of luxury vehicles, and when a new one would come out, I'd go to the dealership in my luxury car to purchase the new one, to drive the new one home, to then have a buddy come with me to go back to get my car at the dealership. It was just nuts. There's just no reason. It just became an excess.
Well, I think it becomes a societal problem. I think all of us are guilty of having way more than we need and always wanting more than we have. But the reality is our early life experiences have a big impact on to what degree we get caught up in that in America. And you mentioned money was everything but money to you. And that's true with all people for all things, meaning human beings have the interesting ability or drive really to create emotional relationships with objects in their environment. So we call that object relations theory. And money being one of the most powerful objects in our environment, we all have strong feelings about it. And so as a young kid, you had plenty in that regard. And then all of a sudden, when mom did the right thing for everybody and went her own way with the kids, you sound like you had no resources for a while.
Correct.
And so that can create a ton of insecurity feelings around money. It's sort of like somebody who has a period of real starvation often can become an overeater, a binge eater later in life because they feel like, I don't know when my next meal is going to come.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you were, for a while, caught up in that. And then when that was taken away and you were incarcerated, you had moments of clarity. Is that what you're describing?
Tons of clarity. There's no distractions.
But you found some good ways to kill some time.
We did. Yeah, I got very fortunate. I got very lucky. My time was easy. I did my time on, a very minimum yard, and everybody was going home. So there was a small business development center at that yard that was funded at the community college, and all 5 prison yards met there Monday through Friday. And because of my degree and my background, I was able to go teach all the inmates at this small business development center 5 days a week. And it was the most therapeutic experience for me as I sat across from these guys, hundreds of them. And we talked about business, we talked about life, we talked about money. And I realized at that point that there was this real huge chasm of education and literacy that was inside the prison system.
I mean, you said most of those didn't realize that while incarcerated, they could do things to help out their FICO credit score.
When I mentioned FICO, most people thought he was a gang member.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so we'd start with simple.
It is kind of a gang member, actually.
Well, yeah, that's an organized crime syndicate if we're talking about one.
But you were helping them that, and so what you wanted to do was be able to give these inmates resources to better their situation. Because I can tell you, with my own legal trouble, even my DUI lawyer told me the system is setting you up to fail. Yeah. Don't let it. But it is. And you saw that firsthand with inmate after inmate, a system set up to watch them fail.
From the beginning, yeah. I would see guys, most of the guys that came down, their sentence didn't match their crime. What I mean by that, for people listening, is an individual would be sentenced for grand theft auto. And as a result, would have conditions when they got released. The condition could be no driver's license. The condition could be DMV fines, okay? But the reason they stole that car was not because they were a car enthusiast. They weren't at Barrett Jackson trading it, right? They weren't waxing it. They sold it because they were a drug addict trying to get drugs. That's why they stole the car.
But they weren't addressing the issue of their drugs.
No, they never went to the root cause. And so I'd see these guys come in over and over, and you'd look at their paperwork, and the paperwork didn't match the person. And that, to me, was where the opportunity lied. And still is to this very day. And so I thought, you know what, if we could really get to the root cause of why people are doing this. And so I had a year. I had my 10,000 hours to figure it out. And everything, within reason, I hate to use absolutes, but everything came down to either drugs, an addiction of some sort, or money. And one usually preceded the other.
And people become desperate.
Correct.
And one of the things that I think anyone who's a listener to this show has realized is that really, really good people do bad things when they become desperate and have to feed an addiction, whether it's a physical addiction or something like poverty. I'm blanking on the musical Stole the Bread.
Aladdin?
Nope.
Is that a musical?
The French
Les Miserables.
Les Miserables, right? So that the story has been told for a long time, I guess is my point. And that is that what a brilliant way to look at that. If you can understand a person and the root cause of their problematic behavior, then real change can happen. Just punishing people, just providing a punishment, that does often nothing. If anything, it costs our society way more money in time and money and resources.
It does. Well, and you look at the prison system in general, and these are statistics, not gospel according to Travis, but if you had 8 out of 10 Delta airplanes fall out of the sky today and tomorrow and the next day, and that was the normal course of business over the next years, there would be no Delta Airlines.
Sure.
Right? And so I use that 8 out of 10 because that's the percentage of inmates that go and reenter society that come back to prison in the first year.
The recidivism
rate is north of 80% in the United States of America.
Which is just
it's through the
ridiculous.
roof.
No other system would be in business To your point.
Precisely. You'd never get more people and more money next year.
No.
Right?
Right.
And that's what happens. And so you start to go, okay, so then, okay, Travis, you've complained about it long enough, but like what do you do about it? Right?
So what do you do?
Right, exactly. What do you do about it? So you look at what we're getting. You can't get a live tree from a dead branch. And oftentimes prisons are built in terrible cities because they're far outskirts, right? They're small towns. And where else do you get a job that pays you 40 and 40 with medical benefits and allows you to retire at the age of 62 and a half in this town? The prison.
The prison, yeah.
Precisely. And so it's kind of this cycle over and over, and your dad was there, and your brother was there, and your uncle was there, and your grandpa was there, and that's generally how it works. And so,
that's on both sides. That's in the prison
absolutely.
and working at the prison.
You got it.
I mean,
It is.
it's both sides.
You're absolutely right. And you'd see these guys, and so if you really meet a human corrections officer that will really give you the honest truth, they'll tell you, hey, I've done more time than all these guys. I'm just as institutionalized as these guys. You get a guy who goes, quote unquote, to prison every day for 10 hours a day for 30 years. That's an institutionalized human. They drive a certain way. They talk a certain way. They interact with folks a certain way. They're scared to death to give out their Gmail because somebody might know them as a CO. Like, these people are definitely positioned differently. I've met with thousands of them. And so to your point, both sides of that aisle, right? They talk and they interact almost identically, even though they think that they're so different. And so what do you do, right? And so I say, okay, well, there's got to be a solution. And in my opinion, the solution was education. You're talking about, statistically, 65% of anybody who's been incarcerated in America doesn't have a GED. So let's start there. 30-some% of every juvenile currently incarcerated, the first time they ever did an addictive substance was with their parents, one or the other.
Wow.
You start to see these patterns, these trends, right? And so then I ask, well, what's the biggest difference? And the answer always comes back to education. Education and literacy, education and literacy. And the only thing that I knew at the time that was so important to me and really had changed my life was money, was financial literacy. So I started with the financial literacy course while I was in prison. I wrote it and wrote it and wrote it. And I said, look, Dr. Matt, we're going to get Equifax and Experian and TransUnion. We're going to get your credit report. You can get it twice for free a year. And I just started with this simple education process.
Things that most people don't really
never
know. Yeah.
Never, Doc. Never. And let me tell you why. If I can get you out with a 640 credit score, and you can go down to the car lot and you can lease a car for $199 a month, $199, and you don't have to get a buy here, pay here, $850 1964 Kia Saturn.
Teaching people that's a bad idea is a good place to start.
And then you can get to your job, and you don't have to sell dope to make your $800 car payment, and you don't have to put your kids in jeopardy. It's a life changer. The 640 credit score is a life changer. I didn't realize that at the time, but that was my knowledge. That was my superpower, was to give these guys that knowledge. So we started with that financial literacy course. When I exited after my year, my 15 months, I gave it back to the prison, and it was like wildfire. Wildfire. It was such a positive response. Everybody wanted me to come in and teach it. And it started with the very basics of financial literacy, and it turned into, hey, man, I'm never getting out. Can my kids contact you about 401ks, IRAs?
Oh, yeah.
And I'll tell you my legacy story if I never get to tell it again. People go, what do you want out of this? And my story is this. I want someday to be somewhere in some unknown city, and I want someone to, recognize me. And I want them to say, I've never met you, but because you helped this person, that person helped me, and that person changed my life. That's the bigger picture of why I'm doing this. I now provide education and curriculum and content through my nonprofit Accomplished Ventures. We're the largest provider of prison content in the United States.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
That is amazing.
That is amazing.
I'm telling you, I told you this was going to be an awesome one.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful journey, man. It's an incredible experience. I get to meet with, on a nightly basis, the inmates have tablets. I don't know if a lot of people know that. It's kind of like an iPad, if you will. I believe that in America, you won't go down to prison in the next 3 to 5 years without a tablet. I can, as one corrections officer, I can FaceTime 1,000 inmates. As one corrections officer, I can email 1,000 inmates. So it's a technological advantage, but it's a money saving at the end of the day.
Sure.
And anytime the DOC or the BOP can save dollars, it becomes a very good idea to them.
Yeah.
2023, you're going to have the Pell Grants coming out for the first time for incarcerated citizens. So you're going to be able to have college courses now Zoomed through your tablets. So there's a lot of benefits to these tablets. On a nightly basis, we have about 42 different programs, from meditation to mindfulness to yoga to exercise to business 101, financial literacy. The kind of list goes on. And on a nightly basis, we do a chicken soup for the incarcerated soul.
All right.
You know, it's about 60 minutes of a mini TEDx talk about somebody who's lived a life, had a tough time, and how they overcame it. And then about 30 minutes of mindfulness. They listen to it in the morning, listen to it in the evening, but we visit via tablets about 500,000 inmates every day.
Wow. That is incredible.
Making your mess your message. And that's what I love about it, man. And
I love using technology in a positive way.
Yes.
One of the things I said at the very beginning, at the outset of this show, before we got into Travis's story, was sort of a negative commentary on what technology can do to all of us.
It's a blessing and a curse.
But technology can be used for such good. And this is such a great example. 500,000 people are benefiting from that.
Yeah, the goal is 1 million by 2023. We're on pace to do that. So we'll hopefully touch 1 million
lives.
lives.
What do you say? Okay, so I'm going to go the other way.
Yeah.
So what do you say? Because there are probably people listening to this show that have a different mindset.
Yeah.
The victim mindset.
I won't. Well, I was going to say a conservative mindset. They say, why should we be doing this for people in prison? These people broke the law.
Yep, they did.
They have committed crimes. They've hurt other people.
Yep.
They're there for a reason. Why on earth should we be giving them tablets? Why should we be educating them? Why should we be giving them these things that other people who haven't broken the law don't have?
Yeah. So the knee-jerk answer is, for the person who's without sin to cast the first stone.
That's always a good one, but
the professional answer is very simple. If people really educated themselves about the dollars that are being taken from their paychecks and their husbands' paychecks on a daily basis to incarcerate citizens around the country, you would be appalled and there would be blood in the streets.
If people knew what was really happening.
If you really, really dove into where your dollars are going, if you really understood the $86 billion a year that are spent on a broken system, you'd be appalled. You've got about 85% of people that are incarcerated that will in some day come out to the streets. They're going to come out.
Right.
So when they come out, what's our options? They could be taxpayers. They could be job seekers. They could even be employers. They could be educated folks, or we could put them back into the system and you can continue to pay into a system that is not going to build
because
you
they come out,
or them.
They have no options. They become desperate. They break the law again. They go right back into prison.
1,000%. And your children someday will be dealing with the burdens that society from them has placed on your children's taxes.
So let me ask you this then. I love research because I feel a lot of comfort in being able to look at outcomes of research that help guide our decisions going forward in any capacity. Are you guys keeping research?
Tons of it, tons of data
on this? Because what would be fascinating to me would be to see your recidivism rate for people that participate in your program versus the general prison population and their recidivism rate. Have you guys been able to look at that yet?
Yeah, we have a 40-week course, goes through 4 pillars, 10 weeks at a time. And it's mental, physical, emotional, and financial. We start with the mental because if the mind's not right, nothing else really matters. We walk people out of the victim mindset. I tell people felon is a noun. That's it. If the word felon is a noun. When we put an adjective in front of a word, it gives it color. Short hair, no hair, bald hair, blonde hair, right? The curly hair, adorable, by the way. But
he's right, though.
Yeah,
he is right.
Girls like the curls.
Right. So it gives it some personality, right? It gives it you can see it in your mind. And so I told them, from this day forward, you're going to be accomplished. We're not going to be felons. We're not going to be victims. We're not going to say that we are what we are. And that's where Accomplished Ventures was born. So we start with the mind and we move into the body.
I love it.
When the body is right, and I don't expect everyone to look like Michael Phelps in a Speedo, but I expect you to be engaged in life, right? And sweat creates sanity in any capacity.
It's healthy.
It's absolutely healthy. You probably have 1 million studies on research. I can tell you that every guy who's on the yard, who's in shape, acts more appropriately. End of story. You care about yourself. So the mind is right, the body is right. And then you go, okay, spiritually, what am I doing? What's my why? Right? What am I here? You know, research will tell you we get about 78 birthdays here in this world. Anything else is icing.
Yeah.
That's the life expectancy, right? Typically. So how many have you burned? And I have them write it on the top corner of the page when we start. How many have you burned? And what's left? And you start to realize, okay, of those 78, how many times do you see your loved ones? How many times do you see your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, whoever it might be, your wife, whoever it is? The people that you claim are important to you, it's probably not every day. 3 times a year, 4 times a year. Yeah. All right. So let's say it's 6 times a year. Let's say you're 50. So you got 28 times 6. That's all you got left. You literally have 130 visits left till you're dead.
Wow.
That's it. Perspective.
Sobering.
Once you find out why I'm here, then the money comes. You've got to be the man that gets the bag before you can get the bag. That's it. That's the end of the story. I don't think that God will reward you. God, the universe, spirituality, business partners, whatever it is, I don't think that you get rewarded. I don't think that you get the bag unless you become the man. A lot of people will get that dollar before they are the man, and it goes away just as quickly as it came. A lot of people have that story. We've heard it. We've seen it. And so that's our 40-week program. We walk those individuals through that. They take it every year. Starts the day that they go down. And that's our perspective shift. So from that, to answer your question, we've had many states run recidivism data on our program. The biggest one was done in the California Department of Corrections system, where they took 1,000 guys. We went toe-to-toe for 3 years. After 3 years, their recidivism rate was 78%. Their data, not ours. After 3 years, we had 9.
Wow.
That's awesome.
You're kidding.
Promise you.
Oh, my gosh. That's
But we
amazing.
change it from a different perspective, and I'll give people some tangible stuff because hopefully there's people listening to this that are actually able to make a change in the state of Utah, is this. So, for example, let's talk about identity. Let's talk about men. What gives typically a man his identity? Employment.
Sure.
Right? Money.
His job.
Exactly.
His house.
Exactly.
His car.
You got
his
it.
wife.
Right. So if we know that, and that's indicative of whether you're in prison or not, how do we set those individuals up prior to release for those things? So in some other states, what we've done using technology is we put people in front of a screen, in front of a television, and I give them a narrative. Because the narrative doesn't serve you that the DA was a jerk and your co-defendant screwed you over and your
they
baby
made an
mama,
example out
blah,
of me.
blah, 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 blah. You're right.
I mean, I'm
Totally. I could cry all day long if you read my minute entries, but you know what? I got 15 months. It's game time, brother. All I know how to do is step up and hit it. So let me give you a narrative, and it goes like this. Hey, Dr. Matt, for the last 3 years, I've been incarcerated. And the reason that I applied to your job posting is because while incarcerated, I learned A, B, and C about myself. And I think that directly correlates and brings some value to your organization in ways 1, 2, and 3. Now, I don't want to waste 36 more minutes of my life or yours. So if we can't continue this conversation based on my background, I'll go ahead and excuse myself.
Wow.
That's it.
I like it.
I
I've answered all your, and you know what? You're right. Every single employer goes, bro, where did you learn this? And do you have 2 friends?
Yeah.
Because you can't throw an orange in an Albertsons and hit people who aren't looking to hire somebody right now.
Oh, for sure.
Right? And so for me, let me give you that narrative. So that's our employment narrative, right? As much as I can give you the skills of the LinkedIn and the Career Builder and all the technology, I can't give you this tangible, let me own this.
Yeah.
Because you're going to run my social, probably. And when you do, I don't want to have this weird conversation where you pull me off the line and what did you do? And here's what I heard and I saw it on KSL. Bro, own it.
Yeah.
Rock it. Let's go.
Well, there's power in owning who you are and what you are. This guy right here is a good example. Casey, from the get-go, has embraced a small thing, but I think it's very symbolic, and that's his picture. His
mugshot. I'm getting to put it on my debit card.
That's awesome.
You know what I mean? Just so I can take it out. So I know there's no backwards conversations and all that stuff. Here it is. Any questions, ask. If not, cool, let's go.
Yep.
It's so interesting you say that now, you know, fast forward a decade later, you know, and my story's in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal and Yahoo Finance and everything else, so I can't hide it. But, you know, my wife and I, we start our new friends with these conversations. And to your point, people are like, well, like, why did you start with this? Because if you're going to love me,
you got to know me.
You got to know me.
And if you really know me, you will know these things.
1,000%. And I don't want anyone to ever, you know, hit you with a right hook and go, hey, did you realize Travis was locked up a decade ago? Oh, my goodness, look at this paperwork. Right? I never want that to happen.
How hard is it to get some of these guys to embrace that narrative? Because You know
Very
what?
difficult.
That's a narrative that's probably been pinging around in their head for a lot of them, unfortunately, before they ever serve time.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, it's such a beautiful thing. You and I could probably exchange stories ad nauseum. But what I love to do is take it back to I think that there's a place that you can go where you know you took a left turn.
You can find that moment.
You can find that moment.
Yeah.
And I take them there. I take them, each one of those guys there, and then we understand it, we unpack it, we dissect it. It's super uncomfortable.
But that's therapeutic. That's changing.
Has to be.
That's life-changing.
Has to be. Because then if you can understand who you are and then where you're going, you become unstoppable.
I believe it.
Travis, I'm going to have to stop you here, but we do want to have you back because, I mean, you're just amazing.
I have 1,000 more questions I could ask.
I'm going to be honest. I've never seen you fanboy this much. You have been on the edge of your seat.
Well, look at this.
I know. No, I'm
amazing,
telling you. Yeah, no. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And,
Thank you.
And I'm
It's
so
been
grateful that
a
you stopped
blessing.
by and we're going to share a little bit of your story because I feel like you could just talk for hours. And it was all great stuff.
And it's big stuff. My favorite takeaway today out of everything is the perspective of your program. And that is you build up the person first, and then the success comes afterwards.
Yeah.
It's such a simple principle. It's a universal human principle, and we always get it backwards.
Always.
We get it backwards almost every time. We want the success right up front before we're ready to handle it.
Yeah.
And I love those 10 pillars because the last one was finance.
Yeah.
All the other ones are building the person up, and I guess I'm not surprised, given that you have such great stats on the effect of your program. So thank you so much for dedicating what you do to these people that are going to come back into society and build it instead of tear it down.
Yeah. Yeah. They will come back. They will be rehabilitated, and they will support the communities they go back to.
And I guess my takeaway would be education. You know, and we've said that when we started this podcast, is what the world needs is a better education on addiction, on incarceration, on all things. You know, I mean, information is power.
Yeah.
And we've got to be able to give these guys this information. If not, you're right. They're doomed to do the same thing over and over again. And then we go like, I don't know why it didn't work. We haven't changed anything in 70 years.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is. I left a prison the other day, and when we walked out, they said, man, we all turned around, and one guy said, man, I just wonder why it doesn't work in there. And I looked over at him and I said, you realize communication and compassion stops when we enter that door. But yet we turn back around and wonder why it doesn't work in there.
Yeah.
If people want more information about all the things that you do, where do they go?
AccomplishedVentures.org.
I love it. Travis, thank you very much. I've got some business I got to take care of at home. I just got a text from my son.
Yeah?
Hey, Dad, can I get a practice butterfly knife for my birthday?
Important dad stuff right there.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I got to take care of that. Hey, thank you for stopping by and listening to the podcast today. Don't forget, Project Recovery is a KSL
Podcast.
Love you, buddy.